Good morning, Sanibonani, Molweni Nonke, all protocol observed. Thank you for joining us today as we will be unpacking a very interesting topic and a point of discussion on sustainable organizations. My name is Asi Pem Kalisa Umabehlenge, and I will be facilitating today's session under the topic Building Sustainable Organization. A conversation, part of the MBDA Conversation and Seminar Series. I remember last year we had an engagement hosted by MBDA looking at the importance of circular economy amongst all other seminars that the MBDA has hosted. And today we are focusing on how organizations can sustain or redo their organizational paradigm accordingly. But before diving into the conversation, I would like to call upon Ms. Debbie Hendricks, who is the Operations Executive at MBDA, who will be doing the official opening and welcoming for us. Over to you, Debbie.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you, Mrs. Mpalisa, for that opening. Yes, I'm Debbie Hendricks. I am the Operations Executive at the MBDA, essentially responsible for the implementation of programs and projects, but also overseeing a suite of facilities that we manage across the city. So yes, I think this is a word of welcome to our first webinar for this new year that the MBDA is hosting. The purpose that we are doing this is that I think, you know, one of the key tenets of the organization is that we want to be at the forefront of research and innovation, which means that we have to be key, front and center in driving critical conversations that we all know needs to be had, and creating time and platforms for us leaders in the space, practitioners in the space to actually have the conversations that is going to take our organizations, our cities, our towns, our country forward. So the conversation this morning, developing sustainable organizations, is, in my mind, a huge topic. So, but it's a very important one currently. So I think whether you are in business, whether you're in government, whether you run an NGO, an NPO, a school, or even a church. We are just beset by one challenge after the other. I mean, we've just come out of the trauma of COVID. Some of us are lucky or blessed, as I prefer to say, to have made it. Some of us have not. We have suffered losses. We've had business closing, people losing family members, people losing, colleagues, businesses not surviving, losing jobs, etc. Sorry, I hear somebody trying to say something. Can I continue? Okay, I'm continuing. So, yeah, it's just one wave after the other. So currently in our region, we are beset by a severe drought. We really have to look at the ecological impacts. How do we move forward? How do we survive? Not even just that. How do we thrive under these conditions? The threat to taps running dry is a real possibility, if not properly addressed and arrested in time. I mean, what is that going to mean for your business or your family or your organization? The same with the electricity supply. I mean, we are now at what do you call it? Load shedding 3 times a day. That's had a devastating effect on business all over. So how do we begin to talk about sustainability under these conditions? So obviously there's the key elements that is typically in the discourse of the topic. The ESG elements, that's environmental, ecological, the social, and the governance elements of sustainability that one has to address as a starting point. I think the big question for an organization is, what does sustainability mean for you, for your business, for the people in your business? What does that look like? And what are the like I said in the beginning, it's such a broad topic, but you have to prioritize as to when you measure the success of how sustainable your business or your organization is. I mean, what are the key outputs that would have to support such an assessment? Our own organization, the MBDA, we are currently having to reassess our organization in terms of what is our future. I mean, that's the key, the tenet of sustainability is, what are we doing today to sustain our activities tomorrow? I mean, that's what sustainability is all about. And we really have to address our culture. We really have to address our financial situation in terms of resources. We've been funded by government, but the reality is, to keep us sustainable, we have to look at diversifying our funding sources, etc. So we're really in a reflective space around what it is that would keep our organization sustainable. What or more should I say, what it is that we need to do to get our organization sustainable, and then secondly, how do we maintain that? I think that's an equally important element to discuss. So the 21st century, in my mind, is all about sustainability. Organizations have to get intentional about this. I think the challenges are going to multiply. Things are getting more difficult. The operating environments are more stressful. We are having to be more resourceful, more innovative. We'll have to actually come up with plans to address sustainability, to develop sustainability plans for your organization, to then stick with it, and then to hold each other accountable. Are we achieving these things? So on that note, I want to welcome you on behalf of the MBDA. This is a very interesting topic for me, or for us. We would welcome your inputs. I want to say a particular word of welcome and thanks for our speakers, our esteemed speakers, Mr. Kume Dube and Mr. Chule Alasa. Alasa, am I saying that correct? I'm trying very hard, colleagues. Yeah, so in terms of sustainability, how should an organization be able to respond quickly, efficiently, and more successfully to the economic, environmental, and social challenges that the world poses in the environment around us? That's all from me. Very welcome. We look forward to an interesting conversation and positive contributions from everybody present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hendricks, for that warm welcome. Indeed, I echo your sentiments that this conversation is taking place at a very critical time for our country, but also as you were reflecting on the waves that businesses faced due to the pandemic and what that meant for sustainability, particularly looking at ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance impact of such businesses and how those businesses will be able to maintain that particular sustainability as times are changing with so many challenges that are not only faced in our country, but also in the global spectrum. So thank you very much for that warm welcome and a brief background to today's discussion. Colleagues and friends, this discussion is live streamed on Facebook. Kindly follow or tell your friends as well to follow the MBDA Facebook page to catch the recording and many other initiatives that have taken place, facilitated as well as planned and executed by MBDA. Please keep your videos and mics off as it interrupts with the recording and also it interrupts with the speaker that is in the platform. You may utilize the chat section for comments and questions, which we will entertain after Mr. Dube's presentation. Moving forward, we were supposed to have two interlocutors for today. One joining us live right now, but the other had a work emergency and he could not join us today. However, he was gracious with sending us a recording, which we will be able to post on the Facebook page so that you can be able to listen to the presentation even after today's session. Our speaker for today is Mr. Kume Dube, who is an environmental, social, and governance impact management and corporate sustainability professional with over 8 years experience in sustainable finance, sustainability management, climate change policy, renewable energy, ESG due diligence, and ESG integration and strategy development. Kume holds an MBA in responsible investing with a keen interest in the integration of ESG factors in investment decision-making and the post-investment engagement activities of private equity firms. He has helped clients in the public and private sector better understand their ESG risks and opportunities. He has also worked with international aid organizations like the United States Agency for International Development on issues like climate change and low emissions development and their impact on local government from a public policy and socioeconomic development perspective. He has written on all things ESG and corporate sustainability for publications like Investors Monthly, a supplement to the Financial Mail, Forbes Africa, and Inc. Connect. He's held guest lectures at the UCT's Graduate School of Business and the Cape Peninsula University of Technology around sustainable finance, corporate sustainability, and climate-related financial disclosures. Colleagues, I am not done. Kume Dube currently works as a senior ESG specialist at 6 Capitals, working with listed clients and clients of the financial services industry on their corporate sustainability, ESG performance, and their investment decision-making for long-term sustainability. Before that, he led the business sustainability team at MAZA in South Africa. He holds vast knowledge and is actually an expert in today's discussion. Well, there you have it, colleagues and friends. Now let's hear from Xuma Dube. Over to you, Xuma.
Thank you, Asipa. Good morning to everyone on the call and anyone who's listening on Facebook and on YouTube, where I believe this is being streamed as well. I'd like to thank the MBDA for the invite. I always find these engagements quite interesting, and preparing for them also helps me to think through some of my own experiences with clients, and what those actually mean in real terms for the businesses that they run and the decisions that they have to make from a sustainability and an ESG perspective. And I'm hoping we can have an interesting discussion about what it means to build sustainable organizations and what kind of tools are there to help us understand that a little bit better for our organizations, and as well as what that means for them moving forward and into the future. And so I think a good place to start, colleagues, would be to understand sustainability within the context of organizations, and then what role then ESG plays. And these two terms are often used interchangeably, but don't necessarily mean or say the same thing. And the way that I understand it and what I'd like to propose to you is that sustainability is a conceptual goal, right? It's something that we're aspiring to achieving. We're aspiring to achieve sustainability, and we're going to try and define what that means within the context of an organization. And ESG considerations and ESG factors, and ESG, of course, standing for environmental, social, and governance factors, then provide us a framework on how we can understand sustainability in our context, as well as in how we can achieve sustainability and maintain that long term. So sustainability being the conceptual goal, and then ESG being the framework on how we can achieve that goal or that objective. And with that in mind, then, what is a sustainable organization? And I'd like to offer the following definition in saying a sustainable organization, or sustainability within the context of organization, is the ability of an organization to continue creating value into the long term. So that's the conceptual goal, is we want to build organizations with the ability to continue creating value into the long term. We're going to talk about what that means, and there are two things there that I'd like to draw out of that proposed definition that we can unpack a little bit in our conversation here this morning. One is ability. How do we know that an organization has the ability to create value into the long term, to continue creating value into the long term? And if we can't know that for sure, what gives us an idea that it probably has that ability? And the next is, what do we mean by creating value? Because just by saying those words, I think we get a sense that we're not just talking about continuing to make a profit, but we're talking about something a little bit broader here, talking about something a little bit deeper than just making a profit. So what do we mean, and how can we understand that in the context of our organization? And so we're going to look at ability, and we're going to look at creating value. What do we mean by these two things? And how does the ESG framework then help us understand that a little bit better, as well as help us achieve that into the long term? So ability, one thing, and there's two things that we really need to be able to do in order to understand an organization's ability. One, we need to understand its resources. So what resources are available to the organization? And those that are running the organizations, do they understand these resources and how to manage them so that that ability is maintained into the long term? So those are the two things about ability that we really need to come to. And in terms of value creation, are we able to continue that into the long term based on the resources that we have, as well as our understanding on how to manage those resources and grow them into the long term. And to help us understand that a little bit better, one of the first frameworks that came out to help organizations report on their sustainability was the integrated reporting framework. And the integrated reporting framework proposed the 6 capitals, which incidentally is the name of the firm where I work at now, 6 Capitals ESG Advisory. And the 6 capitals and what they proposed to achieve with those 6 capitals was to help us understand how we can identify and measure the ability of an organization to continue creating value. And on the other side of that coin, the 6 capitals also helped us to understand what exactly do we mean by creating value? What is value? How can we measure, monitor, grow, and report on the value that we're creating in our organization? And we're going to list some of those, all of those capitals now. The first being manufactured capital. Manufactured capital is simply what the business has built, or what it is building, or what processes it's put in place for it in order to deliver a service. Right? That's its manufactured capital. It's tools in order to create a product or a service to sell to the market. Then a business also has its natural capital. And the natural capital is the business's relationship to the environment and the way in which it impacts or is impacted by the environment. So it's its relationship to an environment. Does it need anything from the environment in order for it to be able to deliver its goods and services? Does it have an impact on the environment in delivering these goods and services? And this is where perhaps we can even talk about things like what are its sources of energy? What is its sources? What's its relationship with water use and the like, and its impact on the environment more broadly, depending on what kind of business we're looking at. And then there's the social and relationship capital of the organization. And that's its relationship with communities as well as with stakeholders. Does it understand that as a resource? Does it understand that as forming part of its ability to continue to create value into the long term? How does it impact communities? How does it impact stakeholders? Do they communicate effectively with stakeholders? Do the stakeholders understand the role that they play in the organization's ability to create value or in its processes in order for it to be able to deliver goods and services into the market more competitive? And then there's the human capital, and that's quite simply the talent, the employees, and the quality of those employees, and the talent, the quality of their working environment, and also their productivity. And that's a key capital or a key resource for an organization. And then there's the intellectual capital of the organization. And that's its intellectual property. And that's also quite steeped in its people and the skills that are available to the organization in order for it to create value. And last but definitely not least, the 6th capital being everything I think that we all understand quite clearly, it's financial capital. So this is the balance sheet of the organization, its ability to make a profit in delivering its goods and services, its ability to raise capital in order to expand, and its ability to meet its obligations, as well as to deliver value to its shareholders. And all of these thought of together in an integrated way constitutes the ability of an organization to continue creating value. And we use these capitals again in an integrated way to measure whether or not an organization is in fact creating value. Because you need to be able to grow all of these capitals in order for you to be able to say that you are a sustainable organization. And so understanding these capitals and how they play out within your own organization is quite pivotal in understanding what do we mean by a sustainable organization in the context of your own operations and in the context of your own strategy as a business as well. So the 6 capitals are quite useful in doing so. But you need to know how to measure what is in manufactured capital, natural capital, social and relationship capital, etc., in order for you to be able to manage them. to grow them and to effectively say that you are improving your organization's ability. And this is where ESG indicators or ESG factors begin to play a role. Because out of all the indicators that are out there in the world, each of them can be grouped more or less into one of these 6 buckets we will call the 6 capital, or that we call the 6 capital. They can be grouped into those buckets. But you can't conceivably measure everything, every indicator within the ESG universe. And so what's quite important for organizations in order to begin embarking on a sustainability journey is then to understand those ESG issues or those ESG factors that are material to its organization based on the type of organization that it is, the market that it operates in, and the environment in which it operates in as well. And so often what we do with clients before we embark on developing a strategy, on developing policies on how they can achieve sustainability, is to take them through what we call a materiality assessment. Which of the 500 to 1,000 ESG indicators are most material to you and speak directly to how the 6 capitals manifest within your organization? Let's narrow down the focus to those things that are most material. Material in terms of their impact on your financial performance, as well as material in terms of your impact on society and on the environment. And then we've got a starting point upon how we can begin to think about our 6 capitals, how to measure, monitor, and manage them in order for us to achieve our conceptual objective of being sustainable, of building a sustainable organization. But the ESG framework is also useful in another way. It also broadens our understanding of the broader universe of business risks and opportunity. Because other than just trying to mitigate the risks, which is quite often how the 6 capitals are used, it can also help us to identify opportunities that perhaps we've left on the table because we hadn't looked at our organizations in the integrated way that the 6 capitals allow us to do so, and in the integrated way that the ESG framework enables us to do so. So other than just mitigating risks to the impacts of ESG factors on our 6 capitals, there are resources that are available to the organization. It can also open up our eyes to some of the opportunities that perhaps in running our businesses in very conventional ways, we have left on the table, and therefore opportunities to create even more value, to create stronger relationships, to find more efficient ways to use natural resources, and to find more efficient ways and more productive ways to inspire employees, to create more productive cultures within our organizations, and even inspire ways upon which we can innovate in how we produce goods and on how we deliver services as well, or more even productive ways to raise capital, cheaper, more productive, more useful ways to raise capital for our expansion, for the expansion of our businesses as well. And so this is how I believe that we can begin to build sustainable organizations, by firstly understanding the ability of our organizations to be sustainable or to create value into the long term, by understanding the 6 capitals and how they play out within our organization. And then using the ESG framework to identify the metrics and the indicators that we can use to begin to manage, measure, and report on our performance along those 6 capitals, and measure the impact or the growth of those capitals regularly and in a consistent and comparable way. And this is how we can start to take the first few steps, and maybe even take the first few giant leaps if you're on this journey already, in order to achieve that conceptual objective that we spoke about, being that of being a sustainable organization. But sustainability and ESG is also important to investors, as well as to those whose job it is to allocate capital. Because like we said, sustainability and the ESG framework It helps us to understand the broader universe of business risks and what opportunities might have been left on the table by perhaps looking at things in a more conventional way, by opening up our lens to the six capitals and thinking about those in an integrated way. We have a lot more information to work on that can inform our decision making based on decisions in terms of our strategy, how we allocate capital, or how to invest the capital that we have or that we are responsible for. So every investor simply wants to do one simple thing, and that's to pay a good price for a good business, having understood all the risks and opportunities that are associated with that investment's operations or strategy. And this is how the ESG framework and sustainability in the six capitals become useful for an investor or an allocator of capital as well, because it helps them understand good business in a more broader sense, as well as in a more integrated way, not just in its ability to generate a profit, but its relationship with the environment in which it operates in, its stakeholder universe, as well as the natural environment, because these could ultimately become risks to how the business generates that very same profit. Often we call ESG factors and ESG considerations non-financial issues. But I think a more accurate description of them is that they are pre-financial, because they ultimately have a financial impact. And this is why it's important to think about them in an integrated way, and as a way in which we can understand the broader universe of business risks and opportunities as well. And so the ESG framework is helpful in helping us understand that, and also whether or not where you are going to allocate capital, where you are going to make an investment, have these six capitals, these ESG issues, have they been considered in the way in which that project is run, in the way in which that project has been constructed, or in the way in which that business has been run in the past? And looking at the strategy moving forward, have those been taken into consideration there as well? Because that's crucial, again, if we think about our definition, in the ability of that investment to continue creating value into the long term. And so that this is when the ESG framework becomes useful in making that decision as well. But how does it help us identify whether or not we're paying a good price for that investment? Well, as we said, these issues are often pre-financial and will ultimately have a financial impact. And so it can also temper your assumptions as to the strength of the future cash flows of that investment, or where you plan to put money into the future, or into a strategic direction you hope to take with your organization. And that can come into play in what you begin to see as what the value of that investment is, based on the strength of that investment's or that organization's ability to continue to create value, certainty of those cash flows that you expect to see, and ultimately feeding back into how you value that investment today, and how much money you're willing to put into it, and how exposed you are to these pre-financial risks that perhaps were not being managed effectively up until now, and how they may play out into the future as well. And when you're making investment decisions, or when you're making decisions on how to allocate capital, the more information you have, the better to inform that decision. And the ESG framework provides that. But quite importantly, it provides a way in which we can measure how close or how far that investment, that business, or even our own businesses, it is to that conceptual objective, and that of achieving sustainability, the ability to create value into the long term. And so in building sustainable organizations, we have tools that we can use in order to better understand what that means for our businesses individually, based on where they operate, on how they operate. And the importance of doing so becomes quite important considering the environment in which our organizations operate. Increasingly uncertain, increasingly difficult to navigate, with many challenges that are in most oftentimes outside of our control or those of our management teams. And therefore, we need to put our organizations in the best possible position to be resilient to some of the many shocks that we'll face. But also on the other side of that, there's also quite a bit of skepticism around some of these frameworks and their usefulness in order to achieve this conceptual goal. And it's fair to always be able to take a look at the tools that we're using in order to be able and engage and question whether or not they are still useful. But until we implement it, we're not in a very good position in order to be able to make that assessment. But to ignore the frameworks and to ignore the tools that we have developed in order to put us, and not just organizations, but our communities, as well as our governments and our countries, and ultimately our planet, in a better position to be able to mitigate some of these risks that we foresee when we use these frameworks to look ahead, can become disastrous for us. And I'll give you a simple example. The World Economic Forum releases a global risk report every year just before the Davos meeting in
Hi,
Hi, am I
Tamar.
back?
Yes, yes, thank God.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible now.
Am I audible? Oh, okay, so I'm
Yes.
sorry, where did I lose everyone? Okay, let me start from the example I was going to make about how we've used some of these frameworks in the past to forecast what the major risks might be, and how we've responded to those and what consequences we've had to face as a result. Many years ago, with the global risk report, infectious diseases or pandemic-like incidences began to creep up on the list of global risks. In fact, it began to creep up on the top 10 list of global risks, and that was based on an analysis both of what business leaders, civil society leaders, as well as public representatives and government leaders were beginning to see as would be risks that would impact the entire world in the next 12 months or so. And so these infectious diseases began to creep up. But at subsequent Davos meetings, that came after this report is being released, not a single panel discussion was had on how we would deal with a pandemic, or how we would respond if what was number 10 at some points number 8 on these global risks were to actually materialize. How would we respond as that? And we all know what happened late 2019 and 2020. We are hit with a global pandemic, and for the most part, we were caught unprepared. And so we have the tools to be able to evaluate what our broader risks that we are exposed to. But we often wait until too late to respond to them, or to begin building the resilience within our organizations, within our communities, within our nations, in order to be able to survive some of these shocks. I think the next thing that will go quite similarly are the social risks that we are exposed to, as well as the climate-related risks that we are exposed to. We're paying some attention to the climate-associated risks, but not enough, and we're paying too little attention to our societal risks and opportunities that are available or that become apparent when we apply these frameworks, or when we think about the resources, the 6 capitals of our organizations, of our communities, of our nations, in a more integrated way. But as people in business and as people who are leading organizations, our job is to apply them within our organizations and be aware of them, begin to measure and monitor them, so that we are not caught unawares, we are not caught unprepared when these risks ultimately materialize. And then we stand a chance of losing or destroying a lot of value. Destroying value for ourselves, destroying value for our stakeholders, or even going as far as losing our organizations to some of these risks, or losing out to the competition because we have not exploited some of the opportunities that become apparent once you apply these this framework in an integrated way within your organizations. So we have the tools. I believe we have the skills and the talent in order to build sustainable organizations. The job now is to apply what we have at our disposal. Our organizations often have all the resources that they need, but perhaps need to apply them in a very different way, or in a more integrated way, using some of the frameworks and tools that have been developed over time in order to shore up their ability to continue creating value into the long term. And with those few words, I hope I've provided a useful definition of sustainable organizations and a useful framework on how we can build sustainable organizations into the future. And I look forward to your feedback on that and to the engagement in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kuma, for such an informative as well as thought-provoking presentation, a reflection of what sustainability is, especially from an organizational perspective, particularly a reflection on the importance of understanding sustainability as a conceptual goal to be achieved using ESG as a framework. Sustainability, which comes with three pillars: the economic, the social, and environmental, as you have mentioned, particularly such things which are also known in businesses as the 3 Ps: profit, people, and the planet. And as you were reflecting, Mr. Dube, you mentioned that sustainability is actually about, moving beyond, also in partnership with profit, but looking at people, which is the social capital of organizations, as well as the planet, which is the environment. For a business to become sustainable, it definitely needs to focus on long-term strategies as reflected in order to make positive impact on these categories that are mentioned: profit, people, and the planet. I mean, as you were presenting, I began to think about the importance of sustainability with respect to the developmental goals as well as business models that are set out not only nationally but globally as well, and the role that organizations play in not only being the closed microcosm of their existence in terms of supplying goods and services, but the macro environment and the impact of such organizations. So there's quite a lot from the presentation that I've learned as well, and that made me think about a lot of questions that perhaps will engage at a later stage. But particularly, I kept on asking myself, to what extent do organizations hold strategic sessions to reflect on their ESG frameworks? Well, colleagues and friends, as noted by Mr. Dube, let us hear from you. Kindly note that you can raise your hand or indicate on the chats if you would like to verbally engage our speaker. We will now open up for the first round of questions. We have received a presentation from Ule, which we are trying to download at the moment, so that we can share in the chats for people to just engage and read it through. We're also waiting for the recording as well. But in the meantime, I'll just browse through the chat section just to see if you have any hands or any comments from the colleagues as you are digesting this great presentation. I see we have a hand from Hlwati. Over to you, Hlwati. Hi, Hlwati, please unmute yourself. Can the tech team assist us with unmuting Hlwati, or am I the only one who can't hear Hlwati? Hi, colleagues. I think we've lost Hlwati there. Please try and assist him as he's coming back to unmute his mic. But as we're waiting for more hands, we're still noting hands. I'm unable to see. Okay, I'm unable to see the chats, but I think Hlwati has indicated that he'll be typing his question. We have another hand. Over to you.
Hi, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Dube, for the insight that you've given us. Sorry, I'm driving. However, what I wanted to know, I've attended so many courses of ESG. The only thing that seems to be missing is the governance part of it. You know, the involvement of the board, the involvement of the senior management in terms of ESG. You know, the whole governance part, that's where maybe I would like you to touch on. I think even colleagues, they touched on the strategy that the companies are making in terms of, you know, accommodating the ESG. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. I'll just see if we have any more questions or any more hands before handing over to Kuma to respond. Going once, going twice. You can respond, Kuma.
No, sure. Thank you so much, Asipe, and thank you, Potato, for that question. So everything that we've spoken about here, and Potato is quite correct in the sense that it doesn't work without board or senior management buy-in, right? So ESG and sustainability as a conceptual goal needs to be the goal of the board. You need a board that also understands how the many resources of the organization need to be managed in order to achieve strategic objectives. One of those being to shore up an organization's ability to continue to create value. So you need the right skills at the board level. You need the right knowledge at the board level. You need boards that understand that businesses in the 21st century operate in very different environments, where the expectations of organization is to understand their impact and how these six capitals impact them as well. So board and senior management buy-in is quite crucial. We all, in our own consulting of clients, we try to encourage that engagement on some of these issues. This mindset shift that needs to happen needs to start with the board, because if a senior management comes with a strategy that seeks to maximize the organization's six capitals across the board, a board that's not well versed in some of these issues may see that as a split in focus, for instance. And I'm giving you an example of something that we've seen out in the market, or may see it as not a worthwhile pursuit of the organization to focus on running in the business in this way. Or what we see what that ultimately leads to is a piecemeal sort of project-based implementations of sustainability initiatives, only to be able to collect content for for an annual report and the like, but doesn't feed into how the business is run at a cellular level and throughout all of its departments, and ultimately then being able to exploit some of the opportunities that are available or mitigate many of the risks that business might be exposed to. So this understanding at the board level is critical for the board to be able to evaluate strategy and the performance of the business in a more integrated way, understanding the business in a broader sense as well, and the opportunities that are available to the business and the risks that it's exposed to, in a more integrated is critically important as well. And what we're beginning to see is that ESG performance is beginning to become linked to executive remuneration. Because let's take climate change, for instance. 5-10 years ago, climate risks were things people perceived to be future risks. But we are beginning to experience those risks in the very present. And an organization's ability to be able to mitigate those risks, avoid those risks, or even exploit opportunities that come with the changes in climate is becoming very important to the financial performance of businesses into the long term. So we're seeing it become more important in the senior management level. We're seeing it become a C-suite organizations, which is great. And we do have boards that are taking it more seriously. We are more frequently being asked to train boards around some of these issues and how they can use these frameworks to evaluate the performance of management and to evaluate strategy and whether or not strategy takes into account all of these issues that are becoming increasingly important, and to evaluate whether or not the businesses are exploiting all the opportunities that are out there, or whether they are vulnerable to competitions doing so and muscling them out of and on society and the productivity, the well-being, the health, and the diversity of their workforces is becoming critically important at a board level as well. I see there are other questions in the chat, Asip. I don't know if you want me just to go ahead and get into them, or you'd like to read them out so that everybody knows exactly what's being asked as well.
Okay, I think also for the purposes of the live stream, perhaps if we can read them out loud, so that those who are watching on Facebook as well as YouTube can be able to grasp what you'll be discussing on. So the first questions come from Pumza Chebe, who is saying, what challenges has Mr. Dube experienced when implementing new strategies in the organizations that he has worked with? That's number one. How has he dealt with resistance from staff? How has he ensured that it is incorporated in the culture of the organization? So those are the three questions from Pumza. The other question comes from Ushwati saying, as the small SMEs that are mostly involved in the social and community aspect, how do we get access into human capital, as it is one of the problems we have as much as we do the skills transfer and uplifting the communities? But it has a lot of strain financially on the organization. So those are the questions posed to you, Mr. Dube. You can now respond.
I'll start with the question from Pumza and what challenges have we experienced? Well, whenever you try to implement a change in a way in which an organization has operated, in most instances for many years, we expect often to be challenges or team problems in just the mind shift and then the mindset shift that is required in order to be able to see the business and the resources that are available to it in a more integrated way. And the best way in which we try to mitigate against that resistance to that change or to that shift is to educate the businesses that we work with quite intently on on some of these issues and how they relate into their day-to-day operations, how it makes them better, how they stand to benefit from this shift on their day-to-day deliverables, on their day-to-day concerns and responsibility with the organization. This thing can't remain theoretical. It has to become real to those that have to implement it. And the many ways in which we try to do that is by asking management teams to allow us to engage, to engage staff, because ultimately they become the ones who are at the coalface of implementing changes in how a business operates, how it delivers products and services, or how it thinks about its role in society and in relation to the environment. What we're fortunate about is that we're seeing a lot of young people in these organizations who come into these organizations already concerned about sustainability issues. And so more often than not, they become a little bit more receptive to this message, and how that they can get a sense that they are playing a role towards our broader sustainability objectives as a country and as a planet, as well as initiatives that seek to create better working environments and better relationships with consumers, particularly in the industrial sectors as well as in the extractive sectors. Young workers want to work for organizations that are taking this kind of thing serious. And most of the resistance will ordinarily come once you get onto the management bands, because it also changes how they manage their organizations, because they have to look at things a little bit different. And so it does put a little bit more on everyone's plate. And so there was bound to be resistance to that. Although it is important to have board buy-in and the senior executives by buying into these practices, into deploying some of these frameworks, into how they work and into how they report their performance, implementation really has to be stakeholder-led, particularly internal stakeholders and from a ground-up approach. So engaging those who are at the coalface becomes critically important, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to put the shoulder to the grindstone and make this work in transforming our organizations or bringing them closer to that conceptual objective. And there are a number of strategies in which that you can employ. In terms of into the culture of an organization, well, that takes time. The best that we can do as consultant is to provide the tools and provide the framework and provide the information that is required. But culture is something that you work on a day-to-day basis, and that you have to be patient in terms of shifting culture, in terms of incorporating in new cultures within these organizations, in changing attitudes and in changing patterns of behavior. And that's a responsibility that has to remain with senior management, as well as with just management as well, and individual employees within the organization. In getting everyone on the same page, in understanding where you're taking the organization from a strategic, from an operational and a cultural perspective, and making sure that you are consistent as managers so that your people are also consistent in displaying the type of thinking, of integrated thinking, the types of behavior, the types of stewardship that is required in order to build sustainable organization. That remains the responsibilities of those leading these organizations and those managing teams within these organizations. The best that we can do is to provide the tools, the framework, and perhaps information on how this has been achieved by similar organizations, and what their journeys have looked like, and provide support along the way. But culture really needs to come from the people within those organizations themselves. Talk about Ashwati's question, and I'm hoping I'm understanding the question correctly here, and you let me know if I haven't answered, and this also applies to Upumza as well, if I haven't answered the questions satisfactorily here. I'm just going to reread it, is that as a small SME that's involved in communities, and how do you access more human capital? Also, how do you get people involved in the work that you're doing. I'm hoping I'm understanding that correctly, because you need the skills in order to do that work within those communities, to uplift those communities and ultimately transfer those skills so that those communities can sustain that work themselves. I'm hoping I understand that correctly, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong in any way, and I'll make an attempt. Right, and it's always difficult to get of all of these capitals to gather so much of, or enough of it, or what you feel is enough of it in order to be able to implement your strategic objective. For small businesses or small organizations working with communities, often I find that the most useful way to get people behind your work and wanting to contribute their time and best efforts in your work in those communities is to tell a great story about the work that you're doing in those communities. And these frameworks can also be useful in writing that story. Because for small organizations working in these communities, looking for people with the right skill set, with the right knowledge and experience, who might be unaffordable, a story is what can draw them in to come and use that skill and those experiences for the sake of the objectives of what you're trying to achieve, rather than for the paycheck. And sometimes the ESG framework has been used by organizations. In my last work, we worked for an organization that works to support victims of rape and gender-based violence. And based on how we've applied the ESG framework and how they reported on their work in their annual reports and in their sustainability reports, they began to see an uptick in people willing to lend a hand in supporting that work in the communities that are close to them, or in the communities that they come from, and they perhaps no longer live there, on a pro bono basis, providing that human capital to those organizations in order to be able to do so, because these organizations really do have a hard time either raising the money in order to implement these projects and to attract the talent to help them do so. So the ESG framework can also be useful in storytelling for really truly great social projects, or even a really great climate program. From an ecological and, let's say, nature conservation perspective, an example would be how a rhino bond, so a financial instrument listed on a stock exchange to raise money in order to be able to protect the rhino or to save the rhino, for instance, has become fully subscribed. So social causes, climate causes, ecological causes, sustainability-linked causes, when the story is told right, can attract resources and these capitals into whatever you want to implement in our communities, or just to build a little bit more resilience to climate change and its impacts on us as well. I hope I've answered the question satisfactorily, but please do let me know.
No, thank you very much for that comment. I agree with you, particularly as you're speaking about the importance of narratives, which is storytelling about experiences and how that impacts into development. I see the chats, in the chats, there's still engagement happening there. I'll just read a follow-up from Frati again, saying, how do we get capital to pay those people? We already have the skills and we teach how to build the green buildings and to be environmentally aware. And Usingatwa is saying, excellent presentation, very informative. I agree with Mr. Dube. It all starts with management. Perhaps as we're waiting for more hands and questions, just to pose a question that I have, which touches on what Pumza spoke about, and you spoke a little bit on this as well, but I'm interested in understanding your reflections and anyone else that is in the room on the impact of mental health of employees as a core piece to the company's sustainability. As we all know that it represents an important pillar in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because even as the World Health Organization acknowledges, there can be no health or sustainable development without mental health. I think you can respond to those, and we can go back and check if you have any other hands or more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think as the awareness around mental health issues has increased and our understanding of them has become a lot clearer, we're beginning to see the impacts or the linkages or the of mental health of employees to things like productivity, to things like innovation, and to things like the ability of organizations who don't perhaps pay attention to those to retain a talent and attract new talent as well. It's become increasingly important, and interestingly enough, the things that where awareness has been raised quite sharply around the impacts on a business's ability to create value are becoming quite common across many of the ESG scorecards or the ESG rating cards that we see out in the market. There are a number of rating agencies that exist, and all of them have very different ways of measuring ESG performance. And that's based because on the fact that they have very different methodologies or very different focus areas in terms of what it is they believe is more important than the other from an ESG perspective. But things like mental health and things that are related to the environment in which people work, things that are related to the conditions under which people work and how people are rewarded for their work, as well as how people are treated when things are difficult within the organizations, are becoming quite common across all of these scorecards, as well as these rating scores that we're seeing upon the market. Because although we are trying just to save the environment as well, we're saving the environment for people. And as though as we are trying to build sustainable organizations, ultimately sustainability is delivered by people. And so people are very important in this conversation, particularly in the context of organizations that want to create value into the long term. How you treat people, the psychological safety of the people within your organizations becomes very important to what those people will deliver for your organization. And so it's a very important issue that needs to be paid close attention to. The research is beginning to show clear linkages between the two, and ultimately that also impacts financial performance long term.
Hi, Tuma. We have a comment that I've missed from Singat. I'm so sorry for that. So she was saying, I agree with Mr. Dube. It all starts with management. Management should have a transformational mindset to be able to drive organizational sustainability. 2, achieving organizational sustainability also lies in the culture of the organization. It is crucial that the strategy is incorporated into the organizational culture. So that is the comment from Singatwa. Colleagues, we still have time. If you'd like to do a follow-up or actually raise another conversation with Mr. Dube, now is the time. We have 5 minutes for that.
And maybe I'll just take a moment to comment on what Usingatwa said there in terms of management having a transformational mindset. And I think the biggest area where that mindset needs to occur is the way in which we understand how we produce product and services up until now has been in a very sort of linear way, right? We extract, we use, and we discard. And I heard earlier on you guys had a conversation last year about the circular economy, and circularity is about that, right? It's to how do we close that that loop. And that's true, yes, for industrial processes and the production of goods, but it's also true in all the other aspects of sustainability as well. It's the mind shift change that is required in order to be able to think in an integrated way about the six capitals of your organization. How do you eliminate waste? As you as you build up your manufactured capital, you can eliminate waste by introducing circular economy principles into your production processes and the like as well. But also, as you talk about your social and relationship capital and your human capital and your intellectual capital, as well as your financial capital, there are many areas in which the conventional ways of doing business has been wasteful, where we waste a lot of time and resources on things that don't take us closer to that conceptual goal. So the whole principle of circularity can be applied across the six capitals as well, in my opinion. And then that concept also needs to be at the foundation of those mind shifts change. How do we look at the organization in very different ways and in an integrated way with a full understanding of the resources that we have at our disposal, where we are in terms of those resources, and how can we manage those resources better, eliminating waste along the way as we build up towards our conceptual objective of being a sustainable organization. Back to you, Asif. Are you still there? I think we may have lost our facilitator.
Good day, Mr. Dube. While we're still waiting for Asipo to reconnect, can you perhaps discuss just the legislature in this environment? Thank you.
Okay, so not a lot of legislature in this environment, at least not anything that sort of imposes an obligation, except for instance, the BBBE Act, which you can link to some of the social aspects of the ESG framework, as well as the carbon tax, which you can link to some of the climate-related ESG or the environmental-related ESG aspects of the ESG framework. A lot of voluntary guidance is out there in the market as well. So the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has its guidance around what you would like to see listed companies report on from an ESG and sustainability perspective, as well as what they would like to see companies report on from a climate change perspective. So JSE listed companies are encouraged then to follow that as well. But what's happening to those companies that are now multinationals and in other jurisdictions, particularly those that operate in Europe, is that though they are becoming laws, there are laws that are coming into place in the global north around ESG and sustainability. And so when a company wants to do business with a business in South Africa, they're asking some pretty strong questions around what that business is doing around ESG and sustainability as well. Because the multinational that's maybe headquartered in Europe needs to report on its sustainability performance, but also the sustainability performance of its supply chain and its value chain as well. So that's where some of the pressure might come on from local firms in order to be able to implement some of these, if they really want to work or export to some of these markets as well. And what we generally use as a rule of thumb is what we see from a regulatory perspective in the global north usually takes about 3 to 5 years to become key features of the regulatory landscape in the global south. So what we see in the global north will probably become a reality for us here in the global south within about 3 to 5 years. And that's been the trend over many decades. And so companies are probably in an encouraged, or probably would be a good idea to begin preparing for that. We already have a carbon tax. We already have a number of white papers around sustainability. We already have JSE listed companies who now have a voluntary standard that they are encouraged to abide by. And there are pressures from civil society to make that mandatory. So even if you're doing business with a listed firm, there might become some pressure as well for you to be able to help them align to those frameworks by reporting on sustainability initiatives, sustainability performance, and how you're incorporating ESG in your business, even though you may not have a regulatory pressure right now. Where pressure may come from is also more sharply from consumers and other stakeholders within the environment that you operate. So regulators might want you to do so without necessarily putting things into law. Consumers, civil societies that have an interest in your industry, even staff are asking their management teams, what are we doing from a sustainability standpoint? What are we doing to protect the businesses that we spend 40 hours a week working in, and its ability to continue creating value into the long term? So a lot of the pressure is coming from stakeholders, more often than not, also from upstream organizations whose value chains and supply chains that you might be plugged into. That's where the pressure may come from there on that front. And what we're seeing in Europe from a regulatory perspective, we can expect to see that in about 3 to 5 years here in the global south, becoming similar trends taking place on that front as well. But we do have our PE legislation, we do have employment equity legislation, we do have carbon tax that we have in place. There are some other our white papers. We've got the white paper from Treasury around sustainable finance, and a lot of our plans now are around moving us to a low carbon economy, about financing the just transition. These are all things that will impact how businesses operate within our economy as well, even before we get to the point where we are legislating some of this.
Thank you so much, Kuma. You know, as you're speaking about the developments that usually takes place from the global north and how those translate to the global south, I think one of the things that we really do not talk about to touch base, particularly when you're speaking about organizational development and sustainability, is how much pressure the politics from the global north put towards policies, as you are speaking about legislation for the global south. I mean, these two parts are different in terms of history, in terms of economic muscle, and that means the ESGs as translated into organizations in the global south will differ in terms of execution based on, but now the challenge is that all those things are often set out from the global village and the global standard norms and scorecards on what sustainability ought to be, which is a different conversation. But to take us back I have a politics background, to take us back to this discussion particularly, you spoke about the financial sustainability of organization. And I was wondering if perhaps you can reflect on the sustainability, or rather the lack of, for businesses without supply chain transparency and traceability. And also lastly, how does impact investing mobilize change towards sustainability? As you spoke about sustainability as an encouraging factor for investors to consider impact investment for organizations. Just a refresher perhaps on how impact investments are measured and how impact investing mobilizes change towards sustainability. As we're looking on the chat, colleagues, we still have time to continue this marvelous and great conversation.
No, sure. And I'll start with the first question that you had about financial sustainability, right? And financial sustainability can be impacted in one of two ways. One, you could be in a business in which, based on where the world is going, whether you're looking at just transition or whether you're looking at where climate-related risks are manifesting or where social risks are manifesting, you could be a business that's heavily indebted in what will become stranded assets. So in future, you may not be able to make any money from those assets because the world has moved on. And it can move on in two ways. One, there can be regulatory changes that make making money from that asset a lot more difficult. And you can think about where the conversation is going around coal mines, for instance, right? And the moving away from fossil fuels. You see companies like Total now becoming Total Energies and diversifying where they play in the energy industry in order to mitigate against that risks. That's one example. Or it can become the areas in which you have assets can become obsolete due to technological advancement. Right? With the digitizations of economies, perhaps your process, your product may become obsolete because a technological advantage that's more environmentally friendly or more accessible and therefore also socially positive might come into the market and disrupt you. And that's one way in which financial sustainability can be threatened. Is if you are in what are becoming sunset sort of areas of our economy based on where the world is moving from a technological perspective, as well as from a resources and our relationship with the natural environment of a perspective as well. Also, financial sustainability is impacted by a lot of these things, as we said in our conversations, that these things may be non-financial, but in actual fact, they are pre-financial. So if you are blind to the environmental and social risks that may impact your ability to make money, that might impact your financial performance when those risks materialize. So in an ideal world, all of the businesses in KZN should have probably had a sense of unrest that was brewing through to the political developments that were happening, and through engagement may have mitigated some of the damage due to the June uprising. It's a bad example, but it's just a way in which I'm trying to illustrate how a social risk could be managed through understanding how exposed you are to that risk, and what do you have at your disposal either to mitigate it or to avoid it completely. Or if you can't, how to build resilience to survive it when it does happen as well. And so financial performance can be impacted greatly by these things. And this is why I prefer to call them pre-financial factors rather than financial factors and non-financial factors, because they ultimately have a financial impact in one way or the other. Some ways are more clearer than others, but they ultimately have a financial impact. About impact investing, and I want to draw a distinction between ESG investing and impact investing. Where ESG, you have integrated these ESG frameworks and ESG thinking into how you make investment decision. ESG in that context, or ESG investing, is largely a risk management tool, right? When you are making the investment decision, you are just wanting to broaden up the universe of business risks that you understand about this particular investment. You want to know everything that you can know about where risks and opportunities may come from about this particular investment, and therefore be in a better position to make a better investment decision. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to achieve by integrating ESG in your investment decision-making process. And then post-investment, you are in a better position to support that investment, mitigate ESG risks, or exploit ESG opportunity, right? Because you understand them before you went into this investment. And so post-investment, your 100-day plan is a lot clearer about what needs to happen for this business to be sustainable, so that you can earn your return from having made that investment. Impact investing is a little bit different. And impact investing is you're investing for a specific social or environmental or economic impact. And so first you need to understand what you're investing in, what is its baseline, what is its current impact. And with the money that you're investing, what impact are you bringing in addition to already the impact that is there, or that would have happened in the normal course of business? So the concept of additionality becomes very, very important. How impact investing can move us to sustainability is that even though we face significant social and environmental risks, within those risks and within those impacts are significant opportunities to create value. One, by creating products and services that help us mitigate those risks, or that help communities and consumers to be resilient to those risks and those impacts as well. Also, and so that's the economic opportunity there through impact investing, and that's why now currently we have the spectrum of enterprises, social enterprises, those that are built specifically to solve a specific social or environmental impact. And impact investors are looking for those to provide capital so that we can scale those solutions, so that more people have access to those solutions, and also be able to earn a reasonable return from solving some of our key problems. So our problems and our challenges don't have to be a money pit. They can become opportunities as well. Opportunities to create a financial return, but also opportunities to create shared value with those who we're providing a solution for. And so we're seeing a lot more enterprises that are being built around the challenges that we're facing. And these are beginning to attract a lot of capital, which means we're able to scale some of these solutions. So ultimately, if we apply these principles to our problems, we might be able to survive some of the worst impacts of the risks that we face, but also still be economically in a good place once we've survived them as well, because we've learned to make some pretty big bank from some of the challenges that we're facing as a society and as a planet in general. I hope that responds to your question and to your comment, Asif. A great one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tuma, for that. We have a question from Jolisa saying, what are some of the biggest challenges involved with implementing the ESG frameworks? And then we have one by Tabi Lemtiani saying, our science center deals with a lot of learners and we even host career guidance programs with them, some of which might be interested in a career path around the ESG framework and working with companies in achieving sustainability. What recommendations would you give them in terms of subject choices and courses in order to be an expert, just like yourself?
So let me respond to Tabitha. I'm going to ask you to just read me back that first one again, because I don't think I got it quite clearly. But I guess so. My journey here it's quite a windy path, and it's like that for most people within my industry and within my sector. So we've got people who have a legal background. We have people who come from a finance background. We have people who come from a social sciences background. We have people who come from many different backgrounds, because this very concept of sustainability is transdisciplinary. It really doesn't matter what you did in your undergrad. What matters is the work that you do, perhaps postgrad, if you'd like to study a bit further in understanding sustainability as the conceptual objective and how it manifests in different sectors of our society. So what does sustainable development mean from a public policy perspective? What does sustainable development means from a finance perspective? What does sustainable development means from industrial and extractive industry, or in those sectors? What does it mean for SMMEs? So it's wide, and you can choose where you want to specialize as a sustainability profession. So it really doesn't matter what you've done at an undergrad. Wherever you're coming from, you can learn to do this work, and you can learn to be useful in helping us get to a more sustainable place as a country, as communities, as businesses, and as the world. What's key, and this is what I did postgraduate, was to go to a place like the Sustainability Institute at Stellenbosch University to get a real understanding of how sustainability plays out in the sectors of society that I have the most interest in. So you might have an engineering background and are really interested in energy systems. There are courses and programs that you can pursue that are quite specific to that. And there are courses that are also quite specific to sustainable finance. So what are green bonds? What are sustainability linked bonds? What is sustainable investing? What is ESG investing? What is impact investing? How does it play out in private equity and in asset management, and in how you allocate capital within your own business? And there are programs that are specific to that area as well. But then there's a sustainability that has a very specific focus on climate change, and you can follow that route if you have an environmental sciences background. And there's sustainability courses that can help you understand the intersection between climate change and business, if you have that kind of background, but also want to understand how this plays out within commerce and how businesses are run as well. So you can really choose where you want to be. And even if you want to deal more specifically with the social issues, there are programs that you can pursue that would deal with how sustainability plays out in communities. What are the social impacts of the externalities of our economy, or the externalities of our politics around some of these issues? And you can really focus on that and go deep into those areas. My advice to those learners is study courses in your undergrad that you're really interested in and that you're passionate about. And if you're also passionate about sustainability, get a broad sense of all the sectors of society that it impacts and hone in on the one that speaks to you the most, because it's difficult work. And so you really have to be passionate about it to keep at it as well, because changing people's minds can be very difficult, especially in South Africa. I find that we're especially stubborn.
I think we have a clarity on the question in terms of it was, what are some of the biggest limitations involved with implementing the ESG frameworks and its limitation as a framework?
I think most of the biggest limitations is translating what's in the framework into the context of a very specific business in a very specific sector serving a very specific community. That's difficult work. Oh, sorry. That's difficult work. And also narrowing down the entire universe of ESG indicators and metrics or ESG issues into a useful, short and implementable list of those that are material to that organization. That's also quite a difficult task. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do. You're not always quite sure what you should exclude and what you should include, and that's why stakeholder engagement is such a key step in that process. Limitations of the ESG of the ESG framework sometimes is also translating it into different contexts can also become tricky, as well as understanding how many resources to commit to it when you're starting out. It really doesn't give you a kind of sense at what the scale of the problem is until you're really deep into the work. So it's quite a difficult process to begin, and we spend a lot of time helping clients beginning that process and trying to capacitate them in as comprehensive a way as possible to continue with that process consistently into the long term. Because it is a game of inches, you have to do this consistently in order to fully see its impact on your business's performance, on its relationship with stakeholders, its ability to adapt to shocks in the marketplace, and the like. So it really does require quite a lot of work in integrating it into how you do business for you to ultimately see its impact. Another limitation is that we've got hundreds and hundreds of indicators, but they don't cover everything. So there's always something that might surprise you. And so that's why the mindset change, adopting integrated thinking, and being nimble organizations and flexible organizations and building that into your culture is just as important as applying the framework in order to be able to achieve your sustainability objectives. Because something will surprise you as you implement, as you embark on the journey. A stakeholder will raise something that you haven't thought about, that you don't have an answer to. And that is not covered in the frameworks, even though we've got so many out in the marketplace. But the way in which you think about your business is very important, and perhaps even more important than which of these frameworks you apply.
Well, thank you very much, Koma, and also to everyone for the continuous engagements. I'll just give you 2 minutes to see if there are any other comments or questions or hands, and then take it back to you, Koma, to offer your closing remarks. So if there are no questions or comments, we'll give over to you to offer closing remarks. Colleagues, going once, twice. Over to you.
No, thank you, Asip. And I guess in closing is just to stress, sustainable organizations are very important if we are to achieve sustainable societies and a sustainable planet as well. If we are to be able to achieve our conceptual goal of getting to a point where we can meet our needs without sacrificing the ability of future generations to be able to meet their own. And that's the definition of sustainable development that we find in the Brundtland report that was released in 1986, that began to help us understand a little bit better what we needed to do in order to be sustainable as well. There's a lot of work as well we need to do on the African continent in translating as to what our sustainability, in defining what our sustainability priorities are. And often the developments in the global north in defining what their sustainability priorities are have been driven by the business community. And I don't think that's a bad model, and one that we can follow here in the global south as well, to define what our sustainability objectives are and how we see is the best way in order to be able to achieve them. And if we can have those conversations across borders around what our experiences are in dealing with some of these social and environmental risks that we face, I think we can take a step closer towards doing so and part our journey that can complement the global journey towards sustainability as well, but one that prioritizes our needs to develop our communities, but as well that protects us from the worst impacts that we might face from a social and an environmental perspective. The unfortunate thing about climate change is that we may not be the continent that is most responsible for carbon emissions and ultimately the impacts of climate change across the globe, but we are the continent that is affected by it the most. And also from a social risks perspective, a lot of these social risks are becoming more prominent on the African country, and therefore we need to do the work to build sustainable organizations, to build the right policy that helps us to do so, and to encourage our leaders in government and in civil society to be on the same page around as what policy interventions are required, what investments are required in our infrastructure, make us a little bit more resilient, and what we can bring to the table are sustainable organizations that take into account their impact on the environment and society, as well as whether or not they are being responsible in how they use their 6 capitals that are available to them as organizations as well. I hope we can have many more of these conversations, and thank you so much for having me today. And I hope you found this useful.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kuma. We've learned a lot today. We've discussed a lot today from the understanding of the difference between sustainability as a strategic goal, as well as ESG as a framework, and how to use ESG framework to apply the core principles of circularity in our organizations, but particularly the importance of connecting between profit, the people, and the planet, and how we can track sustainability in businesses and organizations by actually ensuring stakeholder consultations and accountability, as well as putting in place monitoring and evaluation systems in order to be able to maintain, as Ms. Hendricks mentioned at the beginning, maintaining sustainability in our organizations. So thank you so much for the vast knowledge that you provided us today, and also for the energy that you have in engaging the conversation with us today. Thank you very much for your time and also for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate your presence and for you taking the time to present such wonderful work that you've done and you continue doing. Again, to extend a vote of thanks to all the people that are here today. There's quite a lot of people that have attended this session here, and I believe those who are watching on Facebook and on YouTube as well, who have been engaging us today. Thank you very much for attending this seminar. We wish to see all of you, and please extend to your other family members, colleagues, and friends to attend the seminar series that MBDA usually hosts, which are massive conversations around the globe, around the planet, around businesses, around organizations. So thank you very much, even to MBDA, for bringing such platforms to us, for us to learn, for us to unlearn, and for us to relearn. And thank you to the organizers for the work done and also for the time spent in ensuring that this conversation moves swiftly and smoothly. Ngesixhosa sithi nangamso, umamphefuthe enkosi for having me today. Thank you.